Here's the hard truth before we start. If this message doesn't sting a little, it won't help you. Buddhism doesn't comfort you with fantasies, it wakes you up. And waking up is rarely gentle. You're here because at some point you realize something most people spend their entire lives avoiding. No one is coming, no savior, no perfectly timed rescue. No person who will suddenly understand you, support you, and carry the weight for you. That realization can either crush you or free you. Buddhism exists for this exact moment, not to make you feel better, but to make you see clearly. When you stop waiting, your life finally becomes yours to rebuild. 1. Accepting that no one is coming is the beginning of power. Most people hear the phrase, "No one is coming," and immediately interpret it as pessimism. They think it means giving up, becoming cold, or rejecting human connection. That reaction alone exposes how deeply dependent the mind has become on rescue fantasies. Buddhism does not teach despair, it teaches clarity. And clarity is often uncomfortable because it removes the lies that kept you emotionally sedated. The Buddha taught that suffering does not come from pain itself. It comes from craving and false expectation. One of the most destructive expectations you can carry is the belief that someone else will arrive and relieve you of responsibility. That belief may feel harmless, even hopeful, but it quietly destroys momentum. While you wait, your life pauses. Decisions get delayed. Action feels premature. Discipline feels unnecessary because, in your mind, help is still on the way. Waiting for someone to save you is expensive. It drains time, attention, and emotional energy. It keeps you in a passive state where you are constantly scanning the outside world for signs instead of building internal stability. You replay imaginary conversations where someone finally understands you. You rehearse future moments where support appears, circumstances change, or people regret how they treated you. None of that builds your life. It only postpones it. This is why acceptance is not weakness. It is the moment the mental noise stops. When you accept that no one is coming, you stop bargaining with reality. You stop asking what if and if only. You stop holding your breath, waiting for permission to move forward. The mind becomes quieter because there is nothing left to negotiate. What remains is responsibility. And responsibility is power. Many people confuse responsibility with blame. Buddhism separates the two. You are not being blamed for what happened to you. You are being reminded that regardless of what happened, the next move is yours. Life does not pause out of fairness. It moves forward whether you are ready or not. Accepting that no one is coming is how you step back into alignment with that truth. There is also a hidden resentment that lives inside the waiting state. When you believe someone should have helped you but didn't, bitterness builds. You may not express it openly, but it leaks into how you think, how you act, and how you see the world. You become emotionally reactive, easily disappointed, quietly angry at people who seem supported while you feel abandoned. Acceptance dissolves this resentment. When you stop expecting rescue, there is no one left to be angry at. This is why the realization is grounding. It brings you out of abstraction and into reality. Reality is simple. You are here. Your life is here. Your condition is here. Nothing else matters more than what you do next. Buddhism does not ask you to feel motivated or inspired. It asks you to see clearly. Once you see clearly, action becomes unavoidable. Another reason this realization is powerful is that it collapses the illusion of delay. Many people tell themselves they are not ready yet, not ready to change, not ready to discipline themselves, not ready to rebuild. That excuse survives only because they believe something external still needs to happen first. Someone needs to arrive, Something needs to change. When you accept that no one is coming, readiness becomes irrelevant. You act because there is nothing left to wait for. This is where rebuilding actually begins. Not when you feel confident, not when you feel supported, but when you stop postponing your life under the disguise of hope. Buddhism does not treat hope as inherently virtuous. Hope without action is just another attachment, and attachment, no matter how comforting it feels, always produces suffering. There is also a deeper shift that happens here. When you stop expecting others to save you, you stop performing, you stop explaining yourself, you stop needing to be understood in order to move forward. This creates a quiet independence that most people never experience. You no longer need permission to improve your life. You no longer need validation to endure difficulty. You no longer need reassurance to keep going. This does not mean you reject help when it appears. It means your survival no longer depends on it. Buddhism emphasizes non-attachment, not isolation. The difference is critical. You can accept support without relying on it. You can appreciate people without leaning on them. But this balance only becomes possible after you accept that your foundation must come from within. Until this realization, most people are not rebuilding their lives. They are stalling. They are surviving emotionally while waiting for conditions to improve. They call it patience, but it is avoidance. They call it faith, but it is fear of taking responsibility. Accepting that no one is coming strips away these disguises. And here is the final truth most people resist. This realization does not make life harder, it makes it simpler. Simpler because there is no longer a mental split between what is happening and what you wish would happen. There is only what is. From that place, every small action counts, every disciplined habit matters, every choice compounds. The moment you accept that no one is coming, you stop living in rehearsal mode. You stop postponing your life. You stop waiting for the signal. You become the signal. And that is where real power begins. 2. Your suffering is not special, and that is liberating. One of the hardest things for people to accept is that their suffering is not unique. The mind resists this idea immediately. It wants to believe that what you are going through is different, deeper, more unfair than what others experience. Not because it's true, but because the ego feeds on being special, even when that specialness comes from pain. Buddhism cuts straight through this illusion. The Buddha taught that suffering is a universal condition. Birth, aging, loss, disappointment, separation, fear, and death are not personal attacks. They are built into existence itself. When you believe your suffering is special, you unconsciously isolate yourself from reality. You turn pain into an identity. You stop seeing it as something to work with and start treating it as proof that life has singled you out. This belief quietly keeps you stuck. When you think your suffering is unique, you expect special treatment. You expect extra understanding. You expect life to pause until you feel better. And when that doesn't happen, resentment grows. You begin asking questions that have no useful answers. Why me? Why now? Why is it harder for me than for others? Buddhism does not entertain these questions because they don't lead to liberation. They lead to rumination. The moment you realize your suffering is not special, something powerful happens. The emotional weight begins to lift. Not because the pain disappears, but because the story around it collapses. You stop dramatizing your experience internally. You stop rehearsing your pain as if it needs to be proven. You no longer need the world to acknowledge how hard things have been in order to move forward. This is why this realization is liberating. If your suffering is not special, then it does not require a special solution. It does not require perfect conditions, perfect support, or perfect timing. It requires the same thing all suffering requires: awareness, discipline, and right action, nothing more, nothing less. Buddhism teaches that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Pain is the physical or emotional experience itself. Suffering is what the mind adds to it through resistance, comparison, and storytelling. When you constantly compare your pain to others, either to feel superior or more victimized, you are multiplying suffering. When you keep telling yourself that no one understands you, you deepen isolation that was never necessary. Another trap of believing your suffering is special is that it makes you passive. If your pain is uniquely heavy, then your situation must be uniquely fragile. That belief becomes an excuse to delay effort. You tell yourself you need more healing before you act, more rest before you rebuild, more clarity before you discipline yourself. Buddhism rejects this entirely. Action is not postponed until suffering ends. Action is what transforms suffering. This lesson also dismantles the need for validation. Many people are not actually seeking relief. They are seeking recognition. They want their pain to be seen, acknowledged, and confirmed as legitimate. While this is human, it becomes a problem when your progress depends on it. If you need others to validate your suffering before you can move forward, you have placed your freedom in their hands. Buddhism returns that freedom to you. When you understand that suffering is part of the human condition, you stop waiting for permission to grow. You don't need sympathy to rebuild your life. You don't need agreement to take responsibility. You don't need others to understand your struggle in order for your effort to matter. Your work stands on its own. There is also humility in this realization, and humility is strength. When you stop seeing your suffering as special, you become less reactive, less defensive, and less emotionally entitled. You stop interpreting challenges as insults. You stop personalizing every setback. Life becomes less hostile because you are no longer framing it as unfairly targeted at you. This does not mean you dismiss your pain. Buddhism never asks you to deny reality. It asks you to see it accurately. Your pain matters because pain exists, not because it defines you. You are allowed to acknowledge difficulty without building an identity around it. This distinction is critical. Pain acknowledged can be worked with. Pain dramatized becomes a prison. Another consequence of this lesson is that it restores momentum. When suffering is no longer treated as exceptional, it stops interrupting action. You train while tired. You improve while uncertain. You rebuild while uncomfortable. This is how real progress happens, not in the absence of pain, but in the absence of self-pity. Most people never reach this stage because letting go of special suffering feels like losing something. It feels like giving up the right to complain, to be seen as wronged, to hold the world accountable for what happened. Buddhism asks you to let go of that attachment, not because it's immoral, but because it's heavy. Carrying it slows you down. Here is the quiet truth at the center of this lesson. When you realize your suffering is not special, you stop being alone in it. You rejoin humanity instead of standing apart from it. You recognize that countless people before you rebuilt their lives under similar weight, and if they could act without guarantees, so can you. This realization doesn't harden you, it steadies you, it removes drama and replaces it with resolve. You stop asking life to be fair and start asking yourself to be disciplined. That shift alone changes everything. 3. Dependence is a form of attachment, and attachment creates suffering. Most people believe they need others because they are emotional, social, or loving beings. Buddhism challenges this assumption directly. What you call needing people is rarely about love. It is about attachment, and attachment is rooted in fear, not connection. Fear of being alone, fear of uncertainty, fear of having to regulate your own mind without external reassurance. The Buddha taught that attachment is the primary cause of suffering because everything you attach to is impermanent. People change, relationships dissolve, support systems collapse. When your emotional stability depends on what can disappear, instability becomes your default state. You are calm only when conditions cooperate. The moment they don't, your mind panics. This is not strength. This is fragility disguised as connection. Dependence often forms quietly. You don't wake up one day and decide to lean on someone emotionally. It happens gradually. You outsource your sense of safety to relationships. You rely on others to validate your worth, calm your anxiety, or give meaning to your struggle. Over time, your internal muscles weaken. You stop trusting your own ability to endure discomfort. Without realizing it, you train yourself to collapse when support is removed. This is why losing people hurts more than it should. It's not only loss, it's exposure. The pain reveals how much of your stability was never yours to begin with. Buddhism does not condemn relationships. It condemns clinging. Clinging is when you treat people as emotional oxygen instead of companions. When you believe you cannot function, progress, or remain grounded without them, that belief turns love into dependence and connection into fear of loss. Rebuilding your life requires breaking this pattern completely. The first step is recognizing how attachment shows up. Attachment is not always dramatic. Sometimes it looks like constantly needing reassurance. Sometimes it looks like over-explaining yourself so people won't leave. Sometimes it looks like staying in situations you've outgrown because solitude feels threatening. Sometimes it looks like postponing difficult decisions because you don't want to disappoint others. All of these behaviors have one thing in common. They avoid discomfort in the short term while guaranteeing suffering in the long term. Buddhism teaches non-attachment, not as emotional coldness, but as emotional maturity. You learn to experience connection without needing it to stabilize you. You learn to appreciate people without asking them to complete you. This is only possible when you develop internal sufficiency. Internal sufficiency means you can sit with your thoughts without panic. You can face uncertainty without immediately reaching for distraction. You can feel discomfort without demanding that someone fix it for you. This does not make life easy. It makes it workable. Many people resist this lesson because they mistake dependence for kindness and self-sufficiency for selfishness. This is a misunderstanding. Depending on others for emotional regulation is not kindness. It is pressure. It quietly demands that others carry weight they never agreed to carry. Buddhism recognizes this clearly. True compassion begins when you stop burdening others with your unresolved inner chaos. Another reason people cling is identity. When you depend on someone, you also depend on the role you play in their life. When that role disappears, your sense of self collapses. You no longer know who you are without being needed, supported, or validated. Buddhism strips identity down to action. Who you are is what you repeatedly do, not who you are attached to. Breaking dependence means reclaiming responsibility for your inner world. You stop blaming others for how you feel. You stop expecting relationships to heal wounds you refuse to face. You stop using people as emotional anesthetics. This is uncomfortable, but it is the only way real strength forms. There is also a hidden arrogance in dependence that most people never see. When you believe you need others to survive emotionally, you are also saying you are incapable of standing on your own. Buddhism challenges this assumption mercilessly. The mind is trainable, emotional regulation is learnable, stability is buildable. Dependence is not destiny, it is conditioning. Rebuilding your life without needing anyone does not mean rejecting support when it appears. It means your foundation no longer collapses in its absence. If help comes, you appreciate it. If it doesn't, you continue. That is non-attachment in practice. This lesson also changes how you relate to pain. When you are dependent, pain feels unbearable because you believe you cannot hold it alone. When you are non-attached, pain is still painful, but it is no longer catastrophic. You experience it without spiraling. You respond instead of react. This is the difference between suffering and endurance. Most people never fully rebuild their lives because they rebuild on unstable foundations. They change circumstances without changing attachment patterns. They leave relationships but carry the same dependence into new ones. Buddhism insists that the pattern must end at the root. Here is the truth most people avoid. As long as you need people to feel whole, you are not free. You are negotiating your stability with conditions you do not control. Freedom begins when your well-being is no longer rented from others. When attachment dissolves, something unexpected happens. You become more present, more patient, and more capable of real connection. Because you are no longer afraid of loss, you stop clinging. And when you stop clinging, relationships become lighter, healthier, and more honest. This lesson is not about isolation, it is about sovereignty. When you stop needing anyone to survive emotionally, you finally meet people as an equal. And only then does rebuilding your life become sustainable. 4. Discipline matters more than motivation. Most people believe they change their lives by feeling ready, by feeling inspired, by feeling confident. Buddhism dismantles this belief completely. The Buddha never taught transformation through emotion. He taught transformation through practice. Motivation is unreliable because it depends on mood, circumstance, and comfort. Discipline does not. Waiting to feel motivated is another version of waiting to be saved. It assumes that the right emotional state must arrive before action can begin. Buddhism sees this clearly as ignorance. Action shapes the mind, not the other way around. If you wait until you feel strong to act, you will stay weak indefinitely. This is why discipline is emphasized so heavily in Buddhist practice. You sit even when the mind resists. You observe even when emotions are loud. You act even when there is no internal reward. This is not punishment, it is conditioning. The mind learns through repetition, not persuasion. Rebuilding your life requires this same principle. You do not need clarity to start. You need structure. Structure creates clarity. When you wake up at the same time every day, your nervous system stabilizes. When you train your body consistently, your mind becomes more resilient. When you reduce chaos in small, repeatable ways, confidence emerges naturally. None of this requires motivation. It requires commitment. Motivation is deceptive because it feels powerful when it appears, but it disappears the moment discomfort shows up. Discipline remains because it is not emotional, it is procedural. You act because it is time to act, not because you feel like it. Buddhism understands something modern culture avoids. The mind does not like discipline at first. It will resist. It will generate excuses. It will produce emotional stories to justify inaction. This is not a sign that discipline is wrong. It is proof that it is necessary. The mind seeks comfort. Discipline teaches it stability. Most people fail here because they overestimate what motivation can do and underestimate how fragile it is. They make plans based on ideal emotional states instead of real ones. Then when reality shows up, they collapse and conclude that something is wrong with them. Buddhism would say nothing is wrong. You simply trusted the wrong tool. Discipline also removes the burden of constant decision-making. When you rely on motivation, every action becomes a negotiation. Should I do this today? Am I in the mood? Is now the right time? This mental chatter drains energy before action even begins. Discipline simplifies everything. The decision has already been made. You show up. End of discussion. This is especially important when rebuilding after loss or isolation. During these periods, emotions are unstable by nature. Expecting consistent motivation during instability is irrational. Buddhism does not ask you to control emotions, it asks you to stop obeying them. Discipline creates a container where emotions can rise and fall without dictating behavior. Another uncomfortable truth is that discipline exposes your actual priorities. People often say they want to change, but their actions show they want comfort more. Buddhism does not judge this, it simply observes. If you only act when it feels good, your highest value is comfort, not growth. Rebuilding your life requires choosing growth repeatedly, especially when it is uncomfortable. Discipline also builds trust with yourself. Every time you act despite resistance, you prove something important. You prove that you are not controlled by your moods. This builds quiet confidence. Not the loud, motivational kind, but the grounded kind that comes from consistency. Over time, this self-trust replaces the need for external reassurance. Many people misunderstand discipline as harshness. They imagine punishment, rigidity, or self-denial. Buddhism frames discipline differently. It is compassion for your future self. You endure small discomfort now to prevent larger suffering later. You accept effort today to avoid regret tomorrow. This lesson also explains why shortcuts fail. When people try to rebuild their lives quickly, they often skip discipline and chase intensity instead. They overwork for short bursts, then crash. They binge on self-improvement content without implementing habits. Buddhism warns against extremes. Sustainable change comes from steady, moderate effort applied daily. Discipline does not mean doing everything at once. It means doing the basics consistently, sleeping properly, eating with awareness, moving your body, sitting with your thoughts. Reducing unnecessary distractions. These actions may seem ordinary, but they are foundational. Without them, nothing else holds. Another reason discipline matters more than motivation is that it protects you from relapse. Motivation can start a change. Discipline maintains it. When life becomes stressful again, when loneliness returns, when old patterns resurface, discipline keeps you anchored. You do not need to reinvent yourself every time conditions change. You return to practice. Most people never truly rebuild because they are waiting for emotional alignment that never arrives. Buddhism offers a different path. Act first. Train the mind through behavior. Let clarity follow. Here is the reality most people avoid. You will not feel ready when rebuilding your life begins. You will feel uncertain, resistant, and tired. Discipline does not remove these feelings. It makes them irrelevant. When discipline becomes your foundation, you stop negotiating with yourself. You stop asking whether you should show up. You already know the answer. And when showing up becomes automatic, rebuilding your life stops being dramatic and starts being inevitable. That is why discipline matters more than motivation. Motivation starts. Discipline finishes. 5. Solitude is not the enemy. Escape is. Most people claim they are afraid of being alone. That is not accurate. What they fear is what surfaces when distractions disappear. Solitude removes noise. And when the noise is gone, unresolved thoughts, regrets, insecurities, and emotional patterns rise to the surface. Buddhism does not treat this as a problem. It treats it as information. The Buddha taught that avoidance is a primary cause of suffering. When you constantly escape discomfort, you never learn how to hold it. You train your mind to panic at the first sign of silence. This is why many people feel restless the moment they are alone. Their nervous system has been conditioned to rely on stimulation to feel safe. Solitude exposes this conditioning. Rebuilding your life requires facing what you have been numbing. When you are alone without distraction, the mind begins replaying unfinished business, past mistakes, unspoken anger, fear about the future. Buddhism does not tell you to suppress these thoughts or replace them with positive ones. It tells you to observe them without reacting. Observation is power. When you watch thoughts instead of obeying them, they lose authority. Emotions rise and fall when they are not fed by resistance. Solitude becomes a training ground where you learn that discomfort is tolerable. Once you know that, fear loses much of its control. Most people escape through constant connection, messages, social media, background noise, endless content. These are not neutral habits, they are avoidance strategies. They keep you externally occupied so you don't have to confront internal instability. Buddhism is blunt about this. What you avoid controls you. What you face trains you. Solitude is not meant to isolate you forever. It is meant to recalibrate you. When you remove external input, your internal world becomes clearer. Patterns emerge. You see how often you chase reassurance, how quickly you seek distraction, how uncomfortable you are with uncertainty. None of this is moral failure. It is conditioning. And conditioning can be undone. Many people believe healing requires constant support. Buddhism teaches the opposite. Healing requires awareness. Awareness cannot develop in constant noise. Solitude creates the conditions for awareness to deepen. Without it, rebuilding becomes surface-level change without internal transformation. There is also an important distinction between solitude and loneliness. Loneliness is the belief that something is missing. Solitude is the recognition that nothing needs to be added for you to be present. Loneliness collapses you inward. Solitude steadies you. The difference is not external, it is how you relate to your own mind. Another reason people fear solitude is because it removes external identity reinforcement. When no one is watching, no one is responding, no one is validating you, your self-image becomes unstable. Buddhism sees this as an opportunity, not a threat. When identity dissolves temporarily, you can rebuild it intentionally instead of unconsciously. Solitude also dismantles false urgency. In silence, you realize that many of your anxieties are repetitive loops, not emergencies. The mind exaggerates threats when it is constantly stimulated. When you sit still, you see that most fears do not require immediate action. They require patience and observation. Rebuilding your life without solitude is almost impossible. Without it, you never learn to regulate your own emotional state. You remain dependent on external input to feel balanced. This keeps you vulnerable. Solitude trains self-regulation. You learn how to calm yourself, how to endure boredom, how to sit with uncertainty without collapsing. Buddhism does not romanticize solitude. It is not portrayed as peaceful at first. It is often uncomfortable, dull, and confronting. But discomfort is the price of clarity. When you stay instead of escape, something shifts. Thoughts slow down. Emotions become less dramatic. You stop identifying with every mental movement. This is where rebuilding accelerates. When you are no longer running, energy becomes available for change. You stop wasting attention on distraction and redirect it toward discipline and awareness. Solitude becomes less threatening and more functional. Another overlooked aspect of solitude is that it teaches you boundaries. When you are comfortable alone, you stop tolerating relationships that drain you. You stop clinging to connections out of fear. You choose relationships because they add value, not because they fill a void. This changes the quality of your life significantly. Most people avoid solitude because they think it will make things worse. In reality, escape is what keeps things stagnant. Solitude reveals, but it also heals. Not by comforting you, but by making you honest with yourself. Here is the core truth of this lesson. Solitude is only dangerous if you resist it. When you meet it with awareness instead of fear, it becomes one of the most powerful tools for rebuilding your life. When you stop escaping, you start training, and when you train in solitude, you stop needing constant external support. That is why solitude is not the enemy, escape is. 6. Identity must be rebuilt, not assumed. When life falls apart, what hurts most is often not the loss itself, but the loss of who you believed yourself to be. People say they feel lost, but what they really mean is that their old identity no longer works. Buddhism explains this clearly. The self you were attached to was never permanent. It was a collection of roles, habits, and narratives shaped by conditions. When those conditions change, the identity collapses. This collapse feels terrifying because most people assume identity is something fixed, something you discover and then protect. Buddhism rejects this completely. The Buddha taught that the self is not a solid object. It is a process. It is built moment by moment through intention and action. When the old structure breaks, you are not broken, you are unbuilt. Most people try to rebuild by clinging to the past. They keep old labels alive even when those labels no longer fit. They define themselves by former relationships, previous status, past mistakes, or outdated ambitions. This keeps them trapped in grief and confusion. Buddhism calls this attachment to identity one of the most subtle forms of suffering. Rebuilding your life requires letting identity become fluid again. This is uncomfortable because, without a clear identity, the mind feels exposed. You no longer know how to introduce yourself mentally. You don't know what role to play. You don't know where you belong. Buddhism does not rush to fill this gap. It allows the emptiness, because emptiness is not absence, it is possibility. Identity should never be assumed. When you assume who you are, you stop evolving. You begin protecting an image instead of developing capacity. Buddhism insists that identity must be constructed deliberately through behavior. You do not decide who you are through thought, you demonstrate it through action. If you want to be disciplined, you practice discipline. If you want to be calm, you train calm responses. If you want to be resilient, you place yourself in situations that require endurance. Identity follows behavior, not intention. This is why affirmations without practice feel hollow. They attempt to skip the work. Many people get stuck here because they want certainty before action. They want to know who they are before they move. Buddhism reverses the order. You move first. Identity stabilizes later. Waiting for self-definition before rebuilding only prolongs confusion. Another trap is over-identifying with suffering. People start defining themselves by what happened to them. The betrayed one, the abandoned one, the one who failed. These identities feel real because they are emotionally charged, but they are also limiting. Buddhism treats these labels as mental constructs, not truths. When you carry them forward, you unconsciously recreate the same patterns. Rebuilding identity requires neutrality at first. You stop telling stories about yourself. You stop explaining who you are. You focus on conduct, how you show up, how you speak, how you respond under pressure. Over time, these patterns solidify into character. Character is identity earned, not assumed. This process also demands patience. Identity rebuilt properly is slow. There is no dramatic transformation, no sudden revelation. There is repetition. Small, unglamorous actions performed consistently. Buddhism values this deeply because it produces stability instead of volatility. Another reason identity collapse feels so painful is because it removes external mirrors. When you were defined by relationships or roles, others reflected who you were back to you. When those reflections disappear, you feel invisible. Buddhism teaches you to stop relying on mirrors. You learn to observe yourself directly through awareness and action. This is also where responsibility deepens. When identity is no longer fixed, excuses disappear. You cannot say, "That's just how I am," anymore. Every action becomes a choice. This is uncomfortable, but it is also empowering. You are no longer trapped in personality narratives you did not consciously choose. Rebuilding identity also requires letting go of urgency. People rush to redefine themselves because emptiness feels unstable. Buddhism allows you to remain undefined while you train. This prevents premature identity formation that later collapses again. Most people never rebuild properly because they mistake identity for self-esteem. They chase labels that feel empowering instead of behaviors that actually empower them. Buddhism does not inflate the self. It refines conduct. From refined conduct, confidence emerges naturally. Here is the core truth of this lesson. You are not here to rediscover who you were. You are here to build who you are becoming. That process does not happen in thought. It happens in practice. When identity is rebuilt this way, it becomes flexible instead of fragile. It adapts instead of shattering. And when your identity is no longer dependent on past roles or external validation, rebuilding your life stops being confusing and starts being deliberate. That is why identity must be rebuilt, not assumed. 7. Peace comes from non-clinging, not control. Most people believe rebuilding their life means gaining control over outcomes, control over people, control over circumstances. Buddhism dismantles this belief at its root. The desire to control is not strength. It is fear disguised as strategy. Fear of uncertainty, fear of loss, fear of things not turning out the way you planned. The Buddha taught that clinging is the source of suffering, clinging to outcomes, to timelines, to identities, to how things must unfold. When you cling, your emotional state becomes hostage to conditions you do not fully control. Even when things go well, anxiety remains, because you are constantly guarding what you fear losing. Non-clinging is not passivity, it is precision. Non-clinging means you act fully without demanding guarantees. You do the work without insisting on a specific reward. You move forward without emotionally attaching your well-being to how quickly results appear. This is one of the hardest mental shifts to make because the mind craves certainty. Buddhism does not promise certainty, it teaches steadiness in uncertainty. When rebuilding your life, clinging often shows up as urgency. You want results now to prove that your effort is worth it. You want signs that you are on the right path. You want reassurance that you are not wasting time. This urgency creates tension. Tension distorts judgment. It leads to impulsive decisions, overcorrection, and burnout. Non-clinging removes this pressure. When you stop clinging to outcomes, you gain clarity. You can evaluate your actions without emotional distortion. You can adjust course without feeling like a failure. You can continue even when progress is slow. This is why peace emerges. Not because life becomes predictable, but because your nervous system stops bracing against uncertainty. Another form of clinging is trying to control how others respond to your growth. You want recognition, approval, validation. Buddhism treats this as another attachment. When your peace depends on being seen or understood, you are still externally dependent. Non-clinging means allowing others to think whatever they think without letting it dictate your direction. This lesson also corrects a common misunderstanding about effort. Non-clinging does not mean low effort. It means clean effort. You give full attention to what you can influence and release what you cannot. You train, you practice, you show up. Then you let go of the result. This keeps effort sustainable instead of obsessive. Many people exhaust themselves because they are trying to control outcomes while acting. They monitor progress constantly. They measure themselves against imagined standards. Buddhism recognizes this as mental noise. It drains energy without improving results. When you let go of control, effort becomes lighter, not easier, but less tense. You are no longer fighting reality, you are cooperating with it. Non-clinging also protects you from despair. When things do not work out as expected, clinging turns disappointment into identity collapse. You interpret outcomes as judgments about your worth. Non-clinging prevents this. You see outcomes as feedback, not verdicts. This is essential for rebuilding. Rebuilding is rarely linear. There are setbacks, plateaus, and reversals. If you cling to a fixed idea of success, each deviation feels catastrophic. Non-clinging allows you to continue without dramatizing the process. Buddhism also emphasizes impermanence here. Everything changes. Success fades, struggle passes, stability shifts. When you internalize this, you stop gripping life tightly. You hold it with awareness instead of fear. Peace comes from alignment with impermanence, not resistance to it. Another important aspect of this lesson is trust in process. Not blind faith, but disciplined patience. You trust that consistent right action compounds even when results are invisible. You stop demanding immediate proof. This trust is not emotional. It is built through repetition and observation. Most people never experience peace because they confuse control with safety. In reality, control increases anxiety. Non-clinging reduces it. When you accept that outcomes are uncertain, the mind relaxes. You are free to focus on what is in front of you. Here is the final truth of this lesson. You do not rebuild your life by forcing it into shape. You rebuild it by showing up consistently and releasing the need to dictate how it must unfold. When clinging ends, peace begins. Not because everything works out, but because your well-being is no longer negotiated with the future. You act, you adapt, you continue. And that is what makes rebuilding your life sustainable. 8. Daily practice is what makes freedom permanent. Most people think rebuilding your life is a phase. Something you do until you feel better, become stable again, or reach a certain milestone. Buddhism rejects this idea entirely. There is no finish line where effort ends and life becomes effortless. Freedom is not achieved once. It is maintained through practice. The Buddha did not teach enlightenment as a dramatic breakthrough followed by permanent ease. He taught it as sustained awareness expressed through daily conduct. Miss this point, and everything you rebuild will eventually decay, not because you failed, but because you stopped practicing. Daily practice is what turns insight into stability. Without practice, even the clearest understanding fades. You may intellectually grasp non-attachment, discipline, solitude, and identity reconstruction, but without repetition they remain ideas, not embodied traits. Buddhism is ruthless about this distinction. Understanding does not liberate you, practice does. Most people relapse not because life gets harder, but because they stop doing the basics when things improve. When pain decreases, urgency disappears. When urgency disappears, effort fades. Slowly, old habits return. Distraction increases, discipline weakens, attachment creeps back in. Eventually, the same suffering reappears under a different form. This is not bad luck. It is predictability. Daily practice prevents this cycle. It anchors you regardless of circumstance. Whether life feels calm or chaotic, the practice remains. You sit, you observe, you act deliberately. You reduce unnecessary noise. You return to discipline. This repetition trains the nervous system to remain steady instead of reactive. Buddhism emphasizes small, consistent practices because they compound invisibly. Meditation, mindful movement, ethical conduct, restraint of excess, and regular reflection are not dramatic. They are effective. Over time, they reshape how the mind responds to stress. You become less impulsive, less reactive, less dependent on external conditions to feel grounded. Rebuilding your life without needing anyone only becomes real when you no longer need constant reminders to stay aligned. Daily practice replaces motivation entirely. You don't ask whether you should show up. Showing up is the structure of your day. Another reason daily practice matters is that the mind does not stay trained on its own. Left unattended, it defaults to craving, aversion, and distraction. This is not personal failure. It is how conditioning works. Buddhism does not shame this tendency. It works with it by creating systems that prevent regression. Practice also removes the illusion of final arrival. Many people believe they will reach a point where discipline becomes unnecessary. Buddhism sees this belief as another attachment. Even monks continue practicing until death, not because they are flawed, but because the mind is dynamic. Practice keeps it clear. Daily practice also restores humility. You stop thinking of yourself as fixed or done. You remain attentive. You stay teachable. This humility protects you from arrogance, which is often the hidden cause of collapse after growth. Another overlooked aspect of practice is that it builds internal trust. When you keep commitments to yourself daily, even small ones, you strengthen self-reliance. You stop relying on emotional states to guide behavior. You rely on structure. This is real independence. Practice also integrates all previous lessons into lived experience. Discipline becomes routine. Solitude becomes normal. Non-clinging becomes instinctive. Identity becomes flexible. Without practice, these lessons stay compartmentalized. With practice, they merge into character. Many people avoid daily practice because it feels repetitive or boring. Buddhism would say boredom is resistance. The mind wants novelty because novelty feels rewarding. Practice trains you to value stability over stimulation. This shift alone reduces suffering dramatically. Daily practice does not mean rigid schedules or extreme routines. It means consistency. It means choosing awareness repeatedly, especially when it feels unnecessary, especially when things are going well. That is when practice matters most. Rebuilding your life is not about becoming extraordinary. It is about becoming steady. Steadiness outlasts intensity every time. Buddhism understands that true freedom is quiet. It does not announce itself. It reveals itself through calm responses, clear choices, and reduced inner conflict. Here is the final truth of this lesson. If freedom depends on circumstances, it is temporary. If it depends on practice, it is durable. Daily practice is not something you do to fix yourself. It is something you do to remain free. And when freedom becomes something you practice instead of chase, rebuilding your life stops being a struggle and becomes a way of living. 9. Right action matters more than right thinking. Most people believe that if they understand enough, everything else will follow. They consume ideas, philosophies, and insights, hoping clarity will automatically turn into change. Buddhism directly contradicts this assumption. The Buddha never taught liberation through thought alone. He taught liberation through action aligned with reality. Thinking can prepare you, but it cannot transform you. The mind is capable of endless insight without behavioral change. You can understand non-attachment, impermanence, and discipline perfectly and still live reactively. This is why Buddhism places such heavy emphasis on right action, not as morality in a religious sense, but as practical training. What you repeatedly do shapes the mind far more than what you believe. Rebuilding your life requires this shift immediately. You do not wait until your thinking is perfect. You begin with behavior. How you speak, how you respond under pressure, how you treat your body, how you use your time. These actions slowly rewire perception itself. Right action also removes self-deception. Thoughts are easy to manipulate. You can rationalize almost anything internally. Action exposes truth. If you say you value discipline but avoid effort, the truth is visible. Buddhism does not argue with self-image. It observes behavior. Another reason right action matters more than right thinking is that the mind follows the body. When you act with intention, your nervous system adapts. Calm behavior trains calm perception. Restrained behavior reduces impulsive thought. Ethical behavior stabilizes the mind. These effects cannot be achieved through thinking alone. Many people get stuck trying to fix their thoughts before they act. They want confidence before effort, clarity before commitment, certainty before discipline. Buddhism reverses this sequence. Act correctly first. The mind aligns later. This is not blind obedience. It is strategic. Right action also simplifies rebuilding. Instead of analyzing every emotion, you focus on conduct. You ask simple questions. Is this action helpful or harmful? Does it increase clarity or confusion? Does it build stability or dependence? These questions cut through mental noise quickly. Another hidden benefit of right action is that it builds self-respect. When your actions align with your values, internal conflict decreases. You stop feeling fragmented. Even when results are slow, there is quiet integrity. Buddhism values this deeply because integrity stabilizes the mind under stress. Right action also prevents emotional spirals. When emotions rise, the impulse is to react mentally. Buddhism teaches you to anchor in behavior instead. You continue your routine. You maintain boundaries. You complete necessary tasks. This keeps emotions from dictating your direction. Rebuilding your life without needing anyone becomes real here. When your actions are consistent, you stop depending on mood, encouragement, or external validation. You move forward because your conduct demands it, not because your emotions approve. Many people resist this lesson because it removes comfortable excuses. If right action is what matters, then awareness alone is not enough. Insight without effort becomes irrelevant. Buddhism is unapologetic about this. Suffering ends through practice, not philosophy. Another important aspect is restraint. Right action includes knowing when not to act. Not every impulse deserves expression. Not every emotion deserves a response. Restraint conserves energy and prevents regret. Over time, this restraint becomes natural rather than forced. Right action also aligns you with reality instead of fantasy. You stop imagining who you could be and start embodying who you are becoming. This removes frustration because imagination is infinite, but action is measurable. Here is the core truth of this lesson. You do not rebuild your life by thinking differently. You rebuild it by acting differently, consistently, especially when thinking is unclear. When right action becomes your anchor, confusion loses power. Emotions come and go, but your direction remains stable. And when your direction is stable, rebuilding your life stops feeling fragile and starts feeling inevitable. That is why right action matters more than right thinking. 10. Letting go of the need to be someone. Most people rebuild their lives with a hidden agenda. They want to become someone impressive, someone respected, someone who proves that the pain was worth it. This need quietly reintroduces attachment through the back door. Buddhism identifies this clearly. The desire to be someone is just another form of clinging, and clinging always produces suffering. The Buddha taught that the self you are trying to become is a mental construct. It exists in comparison, imagination, and projection. When rebuilding is driven by image, anxiety never leaves. You are constantly measuring progress against who you think you should be. Every delay feels like failure. Every setback feels like humiliation. Peace stays out of reach because it is tied to an identity that does not yet exist. Letting go of the need to be someone changes the entire process. When you release the pressure to become a specific version of yourself, effort becomes cleaner. You stop performing for an imagined audience. You stop narrating your growth. You stop trying to justify your struggle with future success. Buddhism teaches that suffering increases when the present moment is treated as a stepping stone instead of a place to stand. This lesson is difficult because identity ambition often masquerades as motivation. Wanting to prove yourself can feel energizing at first, but it is unstable fuel. It ties your worth to outcomes and timelines. When results are slow or invisible, motivation collapses. Letting go of the need to be someone removes this dependency. You still act, you still improve, but you no longer act to manufacture a self-image. Buddhism does not ask you to become passive or indifferent. It asks you to drop the obsession with becoming. There is a difference. When you act without clinging to identity, actions become lighter and more precise. You do what is necessary because it is necessary, not because it builds a story about who you are. Another trap this lesson dismantles is comparison. The moment you want to be someone, you begin measuring yourself against others. You track where you should be by now. You internalize timelines that were never yours. Buddhism sees comparison as ignorance. Different conditions produce different paths. Comparing outcomes while ignoring conditions guarantees dissatisfaction. Letting go of becoming restores patience. You stop rushing the process. You stop forcing milestones. You allow growth to unfold at its own pace. This does not slow progress. It stabilizes it. When urgency disappears, judgment improves. When judgment improves, fewer mistakes are made. This is how rebuilding becomes sustainable. This lesson also corrects a subtle form of ego that appears after progress. As discipline increases and clarity improves, the mind wants to claim ownership. It wants to say, "I am now this kind of person." Buddhism warns against this attachment. The moment identity hardens, fear of loss returns. You begin protecting who you think you are instead of continuing to practice. Letting go of being someone keeps identity flexible. You remain a practitioner, not a finished product. This mindset prevents stagnation and arrogance. You stay attentive instead of complacent. Another consequence of this lesson is emotional freedom. When you are no longer trying to be someone, mistakes stop threatening your sense of self. Failure becomes information instead of a verdict. You correct course without self-attack. This reduces internal conflict dramatically. Rebuilding your life without needing anyone ultimately leads here. When you no longer need validation, support, or recognition to move forward, you also stop needing an identity to justify your effort. You live according to principles instead of personas. Buddhism describes this as lightness, not because life becomes easy, but because the psychological burden of self-construction drops. You are no longer carrying an image of who you must become. You are simply responding to reality with awareness and discipline. Here is the final truth of this lesson. The need to be someone keeps you trapped in the future. Letting go brings you back to the present, and the present is the only place rebuilding actually happens. When you stop trying to become someone, you finally become free to live. You were never meant to be rescued. You were meant to wake up. Rebuilding your life without needing anyone is not about becoming cold, isolated, or superior. It is about becoming stable. When you stop waiting, stop clinging, stop outsourcing your strength, something fundamental shifts. Your life stops revolving around what might happen and starts forming around what you do. Buddhism does not promise comfort. It offers clarity, and clarity is what allows you to move without fear, act without guarantees, and stand without support. When you accept impermanence, discipline your conduct, sit with solitude, and release the need to control outcomes or become someone, you stop fighting reality. You begin cooperating with it. No one is coming, and that is not a loss. It is the moment responsibility returns to where it always belonged, in your actions, in your practice, in how you meet each moment. Rebuilding does not end, it stabilizes. Each day becomes an expression of awareness rather than a reaction to fear. You no longer chase peace, you practice it. You no longer wait for freedom, you live it. This is not an easy path, it is a real one. And once you stop looking outward for rescue, you realize you were never abandoned. You were being prepared to stand on your own.